Morning.
Morning.
Morning, Bob.
Good morning. Finally figured out enough buttons to push here to be part of this.
Be careful of the red one that says eject.
Yeah. Well, I turned my cell phone off, so that's a step in the right direction for me.
Just waiting for Sumner.
Here, let me go on mute and try to give Sumner a call.
Coming in right now.
Oh, okay. You see him?
Yep.
Hello, folks.
Morning.
Hi.
Morning.
All right. Are we ready to go?
I think so.
All right. So our last step was we had a presentation to the Planning Commission last month to discuss items. So where do we want to go from there? Because nothing really big, I didn't get a sense of any big changes being proposed coming out of it. Do we want to turn this into an ordinance, get it introduced and start holding a public meeting? Do we want to wait for the Water Workshop 3? What are you guys feeling?
Well, my feeling is that we turn it into an ordinance and get feedback on the first two phases of it from a public hearing in parallel with the workshop, which is set for the first week in December. And if we need to revise it and hold or get major feedback from the public, then we can always reintroduce it. But until we get some feedback from the public, I'm not sure that we know if this is going to fly or not. Sumner, Bob?
Tom, I guess I'm comfortable with that. I guess, thinking back on the conversation we had with the Planning Commission, and maybe particularly because of some of the questions that Councilperson Osler raised, I'm wondering about what we want to have in hand, what kind of presentation materials we want to have in hand. And, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think before we make any kind of a public hearing presentation, we need to have a really nice package of materials together, so that we can lay everything out really clearly. I think we can do that before, the beginning of December, whatever. But I just want to make sure that we we put a package together that clearly lays out our thinking in such a way that we don't have to spend a lot of time answering questions. It just seems like there's been I think there's a lot of room for improvement in the way we make our presentations.
I agree with you on that. And actually, now that you bring up a good point, Sumner, Thanksgiving is the last week in November. That's why we moved the workshop to December. I'm not sure whether logistically, we'll have to look at the calendar, whether we can actually do it before.
I would suggest that we do it after the workshop. Then input from the workshop and education of the public has been, and ourselves, has been accomplished to whatever. And we can incorporate anything we learned from the water workshop in presumably short order. But so I would suggest that we target after the water workshop for the introduction of any legislation. I mean, you more or less have what you want on there to get a first step. But as you both know, and probably Janelle does not, I wrote, because of the new Let's Go Through Drew, for requests that involve the city, I sent both of you an email, and Drew also, requesting some help on a presentation. I mean, I've spent some time scratching around the internet, finding a map here, finding a definition there, and frankly, sort of throwing them into a presentation. But A, they're very rough. B, the graphics aren't so good. C, it's kind of like really just a subject outline at this point, because I don't have very good access to some of these. You can find a website, it'll get you a great map or definitions, but by the time you download it and try to put it into something that looks like PowerPoint, it's all washed out.
So let me bring us back. So from what I'm understanding is you guys are comfortable with what we've done so far, and you're ready to take that to public hearing. Is that what I'm hearing? Or
Yeah.
do you want to wait until after the water workshop, get a little bit more impact, and then come back and tweak it a little bit and then schedule public hearing? Because at this point, the earliest we can have a public hearing is January, because Planning Commission has to determine whether or not it will be a public hearing. And that would be November, December that they would determine that. And then we have to do public notice for that. So I'm a little less worried about the presentation at this moment. I want to figure out where are we with the draft ordinance and what are our next steps. Because if you guys are feeling like, okay, let's go to that public hearing, but then I'm getting Bob and now Sumner going, let's get some feedback from what we hear at the water workshop, which again is just presentations. There's no public.
I don't think we're going to get any feedback at the water workshop.
Right, it's not intended for that.
Well, hold on. The water workshop is a education Q&A session also. So
Yes.
well, we're not going to get necessarily specific recommendations on the ordinance. We're going to get a sense of the citizens of Lewis relative to the seriousness and mitigating measures. And Bob and some of you convinced me. I think it probably is the best thing to do. And based upon what Janelle just said, we to hold the workshop like we're going to on December 1st, and then move to the public, set the public hearing at the November Planning Commission meeting for January.
Sumner, you're muted, by the way, because I know you were trying to.
Thank you.
Okay.
I've been yapping and making noise, and nobody's been hearing me.
Oh,
I had a clock going in the background. I didn't want to interrupt anything. What time on December 1st? Are we talking like an evening meeting?
it's a 6 p.m.
Okay. So
I just want to verify that has been confirmed by everybody. Because
Yes.
okay.
And
So-
Bob and Sumner, I sent you the most current outline and the participants just a little while ago. And Janelle, the only thing I had to change is my editing yesterday. Somehow I had.
Yeah, if you can just make sure I get that, because I'm the one who's got to set the agenda and
Oh,
get
I
everything
sent it to
posted.
you. You're on. You should have
Right,
had
but
it.
if you said just recently, just make sure I get the most up-to-date information. So from what I'm hearing is we're good with what we have now. We're going to go to the Water Workshop 3 in December. If there's something we gain knowledge from that, then we'll come back and tweak what we've been working on and then get it to commission so they can schedule a public hearing.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if I understand what Tom was saying, the feedback that we might be getting at the workshop would primarily be from the panelists rather than necessarily the public.
No. We're going to get. It's going to be open for public questions, and
Okay.
I think we're going to get a sense from the public of what they're feeling. We can't discuss the specific ordinance language because it's not set as a public hearing, but.
So is there anything we need to work on today for the draft or is everybody comfortable with where we are? So next steps are just, Tom getting me information so we can make sure everything's set for the Water Workshop 3. After Water Workshop 3, we'll come back, make any tweaks based on public comment and agency comments, and then take it back to the commission just to schedule a public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to volunteer to work with Bob to work up this package. Since it sounds like there's not really a whole lot of sort of ordinance development stuff that we're going to be doing in the near term, based on what we watched with the wetland buffer process at City Council, I really, really think it's important that we get a good package together of background materials that the council can ultimately use in making decisions about this. And so Bob, I hear what you're saying. I've been down that road, have looked at a lot of graphics. I have a lot of experience. I'm happy to work with you to try and put together.
Yeah, and just if you can keep me involved, because I have access to information that is also going to be very helpful. And that way then I can make sure it's also in the correct format that the city uses. So everything's
okay. So just to downshift a little bit on that. I mean, Bob made reference to this note that we got from Drew the other day saying that we need to be careful about, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, we need to be careful about how we tax city resources, and I guess particularly you, Janelle.
right, but just understood, but, you know,
So
use
to
me
coordinate
as a
with you,
resource. Yeah, just coordinate with me, make
Right.
sure I'm in the loop. If I can provide information, I'm happy to do that.
so, it doesn't have to be today, but at some point, I think it would be nice to hear, sort of just have a discussion on what elements we think we would have in such a presentation, just as background material and so on. And it doesn't have to happen today. Maybe Bob and I need to spend some time and put it together and circulate it. Bob, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I very much agree. And I appreciate the chance to work with you. So.
Okay. Yeah, Janelle, I mean, as time goes by, you're being pulled in a lot of different directions. I think we're just trying to make sure that we're not.
Yep, no, if I'm offering my help, don't worry about it. That's my job. But also keep me in the loop, because I might see things from a different perspective that might be able to help, guide you guys here or there, and,
Okay.
make sure, because the city has a format and different things that we like to use. And I know Drew, I've been working with Kay about putting together a standardization for reports and stuff. So we've actually been working on that as well.
So by format, do you mean like the documents that, for example, you and Tom have been putting together for things like the 5G, or some of these briefing documents for the planning? I mean, what do you mean by format? What?
Well, Drew sent out an email saying make sure everything has a standard format.
Right.
And I talked to Kay about that, and we've been trying to come up with how to put the report together, and then I can put it in the system to make sure it follows that look, that feel, so everything's clean and consistent.
But you're talking about look and feel, not content.
Substance.
No, the substance would be, whatever you guys want to do. I'm here to help add substance.
Okay, super. So do you think it's best that sort of Bob and I go off, after today and try to put this together? Or, are there any issues with us doing this offline?
No, just keep me, if you're going to do back and forth email, just copy me, so that way I can, if you're looking for data and you go off somewhere and I'm like, hey, I have it right here, I can get it to you guys easier.
Frankly, I'd appreciate that. I have a few other things going on also. So, if you guys want to take the first crack at that, that's totally okay with me.
So just going on what you just said, Janelle, Bob sent this message looking for GIS data. And I've always wondered how we can best access the GIS data, so that we're not coming up with our own versions of everything. And again, we don't have to necessarily do this all right now, but I'm just curious. I mean, how we can work with the body of GIS layers that you're using, the sort of official ones. I mean, I spent 15 years doing GIS work, way back when in earlier versions of ArcGIS. I'm not afraid at all of doing GIS work. I just need access to the data, and I don't know how to do that.
Okay, I think that's a better offline question, because we're actually discussing sea level rise, and and there are a number of people listening. So if there's just questions you have about accessing information, just let me know, and I'm happy to get that for you, because I have access to a lot of data.
It's not going to help us in the near term here, but DENREC, through the Division of Climate and Energy, is going to be updating how you access all the maps that they have to provide them easier formatting and something that is more accessible to people who aren't experts. But that's not going to be out in the near term.
Okay, but we need something relatively near term.
I just bring that up for the future.
And maybe I'm too much the engineer, but I don't think we should present anything that doesn't have a date, a legend about what it means, and a source. Because you do want to make sure that you're not using something from years ago or an unreputable source. I mean, if it's DENREC or the USGS or something like that, I'm fine. But I suspect some of the stuff we already have. So I'd like to up our
Yeah,
game.
all of our data comes from the state or is our own data. So everything's there. I understand you're concerned about the look of maps. That's easy to take care of. I have standards that have legends. So
I invite you to fix them.
Understood. Sometimes there's time constraints. So I understand your concern. And it also depends on what you're trying to provide information on. So understand you have concerns. Those will be addressed for future items. But if you have any questions, because again, all the data we have is coming from the state. It's reputable data. We're using all of that. So is there anything you guys want to discuss about the ordinance or the path forward, or because I know you guys are going to be working on part of the presentation, just start putting things together. How can I help?
So Tom, I'm curious, what you think about how we approach the third arm, the new development, the major subdivision type stuff. Do we want to start working that up based on the conversation that we had with the planning commission the other day? Is there anything that we can do to start developing an outline, developing issues, so on, so that we can get that going?
I think I have two different feelings on it. One of the ones is sooner rather than later. I mean, I'm as anxious as I think everyone else is. I think we've got the foundation based upon what we've already discussed. But I think we're probably better off holding off till after the workshop, and then maybe in December starting on fleshing it out a little bit more. I think everyone might be a little more informed relative to what our options are going to be down the line. For example, one of the things I've asked all the different people to chime in on is the precipitation data we know is out of date. What can we do from a regulatory aspect that's not going to set us up with liability issues for increasing the rainfall events for the 1, 10, and 100-year events? We know that stormwater management doesn't have a structural integrity component above a 100-year storm. Those things, the folks from DENREC and Susquehanna Conservation District may be able to provide us some guidance, some, if you will, guardrails of what we can do and what's outside of our capability to do on our own. I don't know if that answers your question directly, Sumner, but that's my only fear about getting started now, because we might limit ourselves, or we might go off on a path that the state says, we're, because if you remember about 5-6 years ago, the state had increased a lot of their regulations, and it went through the courts, and DENREC was told they couldn't do it. So, we don't want to get ourselves into that position.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing is new development, wait until we hear back from Water Workshop 3, kind of get that feedback, expert information, and then move forward with that. At the same time, working on getting the first two through the ordinance process and to hopefully being adopted.
Yeah, so maybe we want to do is schedule a meeting in December.
Okay, Brent, you had something?
So I'll also add that next Tuesday is the public hearing on the fill in the
Fill in the
wetlands
floodplain.
or in the floodplain,
Yes.
which, depending on how that goes, that may inform a lot of what you're going to do moving forward. Because if there's no net loss on a property or effect on a neighboring property, then the buildup that we were talking about before
Completely changes.
completely gets blown out.
Wait, back, just maybe downshift a little bit here. What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, we had talked before about building to a certain elevation,
Mhm.
whether it be a road or a driveway or critical facility. But the other group that's looking at fill in the floodplain is proposing no net loss of flood capacity on that property. So
And again, that's only for major subdivisions.
right.
Yes,
But
so impacting new development.
if you were to build new roads in a new subdivision and required them to be above flood elevation, then it's going to greatly affect how things fit and feel based on what they're doing as well.
So I've been thinking about this perhaps too much. So please excuse me for the question. And I'll say that I attended Delaware Coastal's programs training thing that Brent, you may have some familiarity with. There's a number of watersheds in the Chesapeake Bay watershed that are doing sort of more ecologically integrated stormwater design. And it sort of bumps up against a bunch of the stuff that we're talking about here. They were talking about a place called St. Luke's Church over in Annapolis, one of the creeks, and I don't remember which creek it was. But basically, I'll have to get you offline there, with references. Let me just say
I know
this:
the project.
You know the project. So
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of that stuff spinning around in my head right now. You know, how do we rectify? How do we build that into our new development and our redevelopment stuff? You know, how we do ecologically based site design that will be restorative, that will be looking into the future in different conditions. So I'm just going to lay that there for a second. But as far as the fill in the floodplain, I've heard you talk about this a couple times. What's it going to take for us to really know whether or not filling a particular site in some particular way? I mean, how, you know, what are the error bars on those kinds of things? You know, how well are we going to be able to figure this out? I mean, I get the concept of what, you know, the fill in the floodplain group is trying to do, and I very much agree intuitively with the idea of what Melanie has been proposing, but I just don't know how it works out in the real world. So I'm looking for some reality here.
So the reality is that you have the whole Atlantic Ocean coming at you. It's very difficult to alter, and it's very difficult to model. I mean, even if the wind changes 15 degrees, it alters how it comes on shore, how it flows through properties, all of that. Looking at it just in a strict vacuum 3D, hey, no fill, it's really difficult to run the model on it, because if you put a mound here and there wasn't a mound, then it goes around. But if the wind's blowing the proper direction, it doesn't do that. So it's not necessarily a magic bullet per se, but there has to be.
Okay, so
It's a touchy, it's a slippery slope, put it that way.
okay, so I've been thinking a lot about this. Last week, I think it was, we had a storm with some pretty high water. I actually drove around, took a bunch of pictures.
So Zeta was blowing offshore,
Right.
and it's still, and granted, you guys got a lot of rain, but it wasn't, it was 3 inches, 3.5 inches or so.
Okay.
something in that neighborhood. It wasn't something that should have driven that, but there was still a surge.
Well, so you know, from the whole AECOM project that Betsy Hicks did, you know, I think at least one, if not several of her recommendations involved getting better data about flooding and when it happens and where it happens and all of that. And, you know, I'm wondering, based on what you just said, Brent, you know, how much we can improve our model, if you will, of when the water is going to do certain things.
So you can have an idea for that. The problem is that that land is going to be there no matter which time it floods.
Mm-hmm.
No matter which way the wind's coming or the water's coming from, that land is going to be there. So there just needs to be a better understanding and a better approach to site design and a bigger piece of land and bigger buffers. So there weren't wetland buffers before, now we have them. So that kind of shrinks up the one subdivision that is kind of driving a lot of these decisions. It gets altered. You know, if they come in 6 months on that property, it looks completely different because of the fill, because of the buffer, because of the sea level rise.
Just so let's be clear about that.
I know.
None of those apply to that development.
I know.
I'm just saying. If a new development came in for different areas, right, it would apply. So
right.
just, right. I don't want the members of the public thinking something's going to change.
No. I'm just saying.
The questions that I'm asking are not at all related to a particular project.
No, I know that.
I know. I'm just.
Brent brought in an example, and I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware that
there needs to be a cleaner approach when it's presented.
What do you mean by that? I think I agree with that.
Sometimes engineers get to be engineers and just cram too much into a small bag. Sometimes there needs to be a different approach to it.
Okay, I'm getting really confused. Can you enlighten me?
So I can drive you around some subdivisions, and you can tell the subdivisions that were laid out by a landscape architect. You can tell the ones that were laid out by an engineer. Just from fit and feel and the way the roads work. Sometimes if you need the environmental aspect, if you're trying to speak to the neighboring properties and not do harm, it needs to have an extra level other than just let's engineer it and get as many properties in here as we can.
Put the planning back into development.
Well, particularly the landscape planning, I totally agree. Having gone through a program that alongside landscape architects, I think I agree with what you were just saying there, Brent. Particularly with these new developments, and this is why I brought up this St. Luke's project over in the Chesapeake. That was done, as far as I can tell, by a mixture of landscape architects and engineers, and they meet and exceed the engineering requirements, but they do it in a way that's so much nicer than what we typically do. And I'm not saying, sorry?
And I think that's the intent of the ordinances that we're trying to get in place, is to take and get them to think a little bit differently and outside of their normal box. To how do we respect the land and allow the development of the land to occur. And I think that's what you're trying to drive at, and that's what Brent's trying to get across is, you know, a broader approach when we're trying to figure things out.
So well, I think the conversation you guys have been having is very interesting. I'm not sure how we enhance that or enable that in the ordinance to do that. I mean, we don't have anything that would necessarily allow us, in my mind, currently to not have a road system designed by engineers. I mean, being one,
No, I,
and that would more fit with what you're discussing.
Right.
Would love to see how they actually accomplish that by regulation versus by having good quality developers.
Well, this project that I'm mentioning was not a regulatory thing. In fact, most of the presentation by the people who put the project together basically said they spent a lot of time having to hold the hands of all of the regulators. There was a lot of crossover overlap. It was a big matrix operation with all the different regulators at the state and federal level. That was one of the biggest challenges they had. I'll try to get some reference materials together and send them to you guys, after the meeting. But Brent, I guess I'm going to push you on this, given that you have some experience with this. I thought that that presentation, that the work that was done there, granted, it's a particular site and the church property allowed them to do a bunch of really cool things. But the whole time I'm thinking, we have the potential to create this kind of program with new developments moving forward, given what we know about the landscapes that are along the edges of the water here. I don't think that we have the proper standards in place. Picking up on what Tom just said, I think the way our language is set up in the current draft ordinance, an engineer could clearly fulfill that. How do we go that next level to get that landscape design element in, to get more ecological, restorative sort of systems perspective goals in there? How do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, right now in our subdivision, we've got the 21 criteria, and we have, minimize tree loss, minimize topography changes, but there's nothing that I can think of in there that we could hang our hat on to accomplish what you guys are talking about, which.
I mean, one of the things that they did so well in that St. Luke's project is, they did an entire watershed analysis, a sub-watershed, mind you, but, for any site that we might look at in a major subdivision, I think the same thing would be applicable. But basically, they went from the downstream end, basically where the stormwater management practice outfalls are probably going to go into some sort of tidewater around here, all the way up to the top of the highest elevation on the site. And as they were working out sort of how to manage stormwater, how to slow it down with biological controls, a series of weirs that they set up that were constructed wetlands effectively. They were also thinking about future sea level rise and the way that the water would ultimately be coming in from the tidewater area. So it was working in both directions. It was a beautiful design. And I don't think we're currently creating such a standard, creating that kind of thinking. And I realize that one of the challenges is the county manages stormwater. I don't know if they're really thinking about this sea level rise piece.
So the county actually doesn't manage stormwater. The Sussex Conservation District is in charge of that.
That's
no, it's just, there's been a lot of confusion about that lately, that people think it's the county, and it is not. It's actually an offshoot of DENREC that addresses that. And I think as part of the action plan, there are items in there to look at the subdivision regulations. So that will be, you'll be seeing that in December, to take a bigger look at, are there things in the subdivision code? Are there other sections of code that need to be addressed to help get to the picture that you want Lewis to look like? So there's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts, and other, especially from the action plan of like different sections of code that need to be addressed, you picked up on. And one of them is actually looking at the criteria for a subdivision. Do they need to be updated? Do we need to add different things? So that is actually one of the items in the action plan that's being considered. And you'll see that in December.
I'm asking, I'm really looking forward to how that all works out. But relative to what we're talking about here, I think there's value in talking about, what further criteria we might put into the mix of our draft ordinance right now.
Right,
I mean,
and I
Brent,
think,
given what I'm raising in St. Luke's, I mean, are there things that we should be doing, if not right now with the redevelopment piece, looking forward to the development of the new development piece? You know, are there ways that we can juice this up a little bit and get this going?
Sorry, I think you hit it on that. I personally don't think it fits in with the redevelopment infrastructure piece because you're dealing with individual plots of land. But clearly the next phase, new development, subdivision, is going to have to touch on those.
So, sorry, let me put it differently. At least looking at the thinking that seemed to control the way this St. Luke's project worked, in my mind, the whole time I was listening to the presentation, I felt like there might be a reason for us to rethink specific criteria against which we evaluate projects, whether they be rebuilding on a site level, you know, one lot, or whether they be, you know, I think it's a matter of where is that lot and how does the water flow over and through that lot in relationship to the bigger sort of sub-watershed picture. So yeah, there's a limited amount you can do with one parcel, but I think it's important for us to understand where any parcel fits into the, I'll call it the hydrologic framework of a given watershed. You know, is it at the bottom of the watershed? Is it sitting right next to a tidewater that might be the discharge area for a, you know, a whole neighborhood? Or is it way up in the headwater somewhere? Does that change what we think we want to do? Maybe I'm asking too much.
Well, I mean, we already have an ordinance that says that you can't change the watershed water flow over your parcel of land. So you can't shed to a neighbor's property. You can't. So, I mean, when you're talking about, you know, a 5,000 square foot lot, 7,000 square foot lot, you know, I think it's a little difficult to think that we're going to influence because it's not going to be a continuous shed. But when you're talking about new development, that then gives us the leeway or the potential to add to the 21 criteria to enhance how we want water to be handled on that site.
Well, and I guess part of what I was thinking about, I'm sorry, I've been thinking very differently lately, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm belaboring too many things here, but you know, building on the sort of the BMP sort of rubric that we set up in the draft ordinance, seems to me there are opportunities for incentivizing, I'll call it restorative measures, even on a site level, but definitely on that new development level. Things that go above and beyond, and they may not really be covered in the current listing of BMPs that we have. And so I'm going to ask Brent, you know, are there things that we missed?
So the issue is that DENREC controls the stormwater review, and they've been given the manual that's come from the state. The state took time to develop all that. They looked at adjacent states, figured out what they wanted. That's what they came up with. The problem with trying to do anything outside that box is the effort to push that ball up the hill is so great that I'm not going to say we would fail, but I don't think we would be successful.
And we don't have the budget to do that anyway.
Doing it.
Yeah.
The budget, the bandwidth, the manpower, the knowledge, the base. So while the St. Luke's project is fantastic, they did one in Bishopville in Maryland that actually drains part of lower Delaware and Selbyville down into it. Same firm. They also did Cannery Stream restoration project in downtown Cambridge that I was working at Cambridge when it occurred, and hired them on, so got to know.
You know those guys. You understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know how it works. We got a $1.8 million grant. That wouldn't have occurred without that money. You know, if we just wanted to do stormwater on the park proper, we could have put 150,000 into it and been done with it. It worked out that in Cambridge, we actually had 18 feet of fall from the upper end to the lower end, and it's tidal at the bottom underneath Cedar Street. So similar to St. Luke's, it has that. And when you have that, it turns into this elegant project because it encompasses so much. Right. And you see it all work together. On a single site, sometimes you're going to get 2 feet of elevation change and you'll never end up with an elegant design. So it's just the reality of it. You know, some of them just, they end up being what they are.
So I guess that maybe just to dispense with this for good here, I mean, is it even possible, given our total elevation range in Lewis, from the highest to the lowest point, is it even feasible to be thinking about this?
So it can be done, and it could be done on a case-by-case basis. It could be done on a governmental site. It could be done on a nonprofit site in conjunction. A for-profit entity or a private homeowner most likely are not going to go down this path, and they're not going to spend their time or turn their property into that. You know, you see churches, there's a couple other churches that have been done just because they physically don't have money, and a lot of them have the age, and the site's been the site, and they're trying to get nutrient reduction, and that's been one of the big pushes for those projects, is the nutrient reduction goals.
There seem to be a whole lot of hydrologic benefits as well. That was where I was coming from.
There are, but the kind of the driving line is the nutrient reduction, which drives the dollar to allow it to occur.
Right.
And then on the top side, you get, you know, whoever's riding by go, oh, that's really pretty. That's a pretty hydrologic project, but they don't understand the driver of what made it happen. Right. So it's, you know, sometimes we get caught on little things. I'll tell a quick story, and it reminds me of sometimes we had trees planted in Cambridge, and I got a phone call from a master gardener just in tears that this tree was going to die, and the tree had been there for 2 years, and we were putting in brick pavers in the parking along the street, and she just well, you're not going to do anything, and that pisses me off, and just, you know, kept going on and on. I said, man, okay, I'm going to flip the script here. Do you know what I have to deal with in the street? She's like, what do you mean? I said, do you know what's under the ground there? She goes, no. I said, I have a 10-inch water line and water services and water meters. I have a 12-inch sewer line and all the sewer laterals and cleanouts. I have under drains for the brick pavers. I have a curb that's got an 18-inch gutter on it. I've got an 8-inch high pressure gas that services the whole city coming off of Route 50. I've got underground power, FiOS, fiber, cable, all of that, all within 10 feet of that tree. She's like, oh my God. I said, so do I move all of them for the tree to go lower, or does the tree live happily where it is? And all she could see was this tree. She didn't understand everything else that went into it. And that's so, and this goes into the presentation to council. Sometimes just a little quick background takes all of that out of play. So I would make it concise, quick. I wouldn't do maps, because you're not mapping anything for this ordinance. This ordinance is theory. I have that trouble all the time. I'm an engineer. I want to see maps. I want to see results. I want to see case by case. But I would say, keep it high level, keep it theory, but give background. The sea is rising. It's projected to do this. This area is going to be underwater in the future. We need to address it.
But sometimes a map is worth 1,000 words as far as showing the
Sometimes.
impacted area.
Right, but then you're drilling down to specific sites, and you don't want to call out specific sites for this ordinance. This ordinance is
Holistic.
all future major subdivisions will abide by this.
Oh, for the
Period.
future subdivision, but for the current, the redevelopment, I think council's going to want to see what how much
Well, you
is.
can show a flood map.
Yeah.
You know, where the floodplain is,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't call out much more than that. It's just as it stands now, because it's always moving, it's always changing, you know.
Well, what we've used in the past was in developing this is the flood map. Obviously, the FEMA flood
Right.
map is part of it, but then the bathtub curves that DENREC puts out, so that you can see with a 1 meter level increase how much area is impacted. And as Janelle has shown on those maps, it doesn't necessarily engulf a lot of lateral land going from the current sea level to a 1 meter rise. Because I think it's partly
Wow,
reassuring.
I don't agree with that, Tom.
So I think
Nor do I.
for presentation wise, if we just use the floodplain map, because that's the properties that are going to be impacted. I don't think we need to show anything else, because as we've identified, as the curve moves, the curve's going to move and that information is going to change. So just going, okay, if you're in the floodplain and the floodplain as it changes, you're in that if you want to use a map for that. Because I think, again, high level, because people will take it and want to dig down to their property and their impacts, which is definitely, you know, important, but we're looking holistically at the city. So we can look at that. So if we don't,
I simply don't agree with you, because you postulate a 1 meter sea level rise. It starts to affect a lot of properties in this city.
So you're assuming two things, that you're basing that today's FEMA map will also be that
tomorrow's
FEMA map when you in the future, and that sea level rise is prescriptive, and it will rise that 3 feet in that time. You're making those two assumptions. So say we're down the road at 2040, we have 2 new FEMA map iterations that have come out and a new projection on sea level rise. It is not what the map you're showing today, but if you show that map today based on that, you're affecting how the theory of the ordinance is operational.
Why are those two assumptions not valid?
The map may change, it may not change, but most likely it will change.
Yeah, but I'm still not sure that invalidates using the best information we have today.
But the best information you have today is a projection on sea level rise and the actual FEMA map, period. But so you've done the time frame, the lifespan. The lifespan doesn't start today. If somebody wants to build a new fire station in 2040, you can't bound them by today's map. You're binding them by 2040 map and projection.
And that's built into the ordinance that the.
Correct. So that's what I'm
right,
saying.
that's why he's saying don't show it, because if you show it, people are gonna tie it to today when all of that is changing. It goes actually back to Sumner's big thing is what we're doing today is we're planning for the change, so nothing's actually set in stone. So it's actually a little bit more difficult to map, because if you show something, people will just think that that's what it is and that's what it'll be tomorrow, and it won't. It's constantly going to change.
You're saying it's either I am or I am not going to be affected by this based on some picture of today and the future going so far
And
forward. Yeah.
most likely it's, I am going to, but not today, but tomorrow I will be. So, but if you show them a picture of today, they're going to think I am not, but they probably will be in the future.
Yeah, and that's where I'm having trouble. I cannot imagine at a public hearing that the question isn't going to come up of what impact does this have on the land mass, the two-dimensional land mass of Lewis, a 3 feet 1 meter increase in sea level rise.
So
How much is,
I'll also say that that makes the assumption that that sea level rise is 100% accurate.
No, it's, I mean, it's a
I know.
possibility. I
So
mean,
So
as
by
we've shown
2050,
is,
in Delaware, it's 2.1 feet. In Maryland, it's 1.2 feet.
right.
so as the information that we have, the assumptions that we have today, it's following the floodplain, which honestly makes sense. The sea level rise is most likely going to follow the floodplain. And that's how we have addressed this ordinance, is that it's going to follow the floodplain. So as you are in the floodplain, you are subject to this ordinance. And then at certain places, you just have to build to different years out based on that projection. So if you want to map, fine. If you don't want to map, that's okay. I'm happy to help. I've got the data that can create the maps. But is there anything else we want to talk about today? I think we should wait until after the water workshop to schedule another meeting in December, because we might want to take some time to get ideas and get them to me so that I can update the ordinance based on that conversation that we'll have in early December. What are your guys' thoughts?
There's also the virtual Rascal conference
Yes.
the second week in December.
Correct. So we'll definitely avoid that.
I'm okay with what you're proposing, Janelle.
Okay. Because I think I'll just send out an email after Water Workshop 3 and say, okay, when do you guys want to meet next? Just to kind of because I think it sounds like we're good right now. And then I think also some homework is to start thinking about what do you guys want to see in new development? What have you heard? What have you seen? So you can get some of those ideas and then bring those and have those kind of thoughts to the Water Workshop 3 and see how those can impact what your thoughts are having.
Okay.
well, it sounds like we're done for today. There's some interesting things in the chat from Diane that would more or less support what Tom said.
From Danielle.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Again, we're
I
just
didn't
using the
see that
best
Danielle.
information we have now, and the maps will change as data changes.
So, one of the things that I actually worked up this morning, because I haven't really heard it in the various conversations that I've witnessed at the city level. And since Danielle's on listening in, I think one of the important aspects of all this sea level rise stuff is, it's one thing to talk about the sea level as we imagine it, but of course it's such a dynamic level, right? Every day it goes up and down, 5 feet, 6 feet. And each month it goes up and down a little more based on the phase of the moon. And then like Brent was talking about before, we've got all these different storms that are going by and what happens with wind. There are graphs, I've started to put them together, that look at what's called nuisance flooding, high tide flooding, the kinds of things that are slowly doing us in. We're not talking the catastrophic storm surges that come from a Category 3 storm. We're just talking about the kind of stuff that happened the other day. Through time, the frequency of those kinds of events increases. And there's some pretty dramatic numbers that NOAA has put together as to how many high tide events we might have. And we're talking a half meter, I believe, as a high tide event. By 2030, 20% of the days, maybe, I think. I may have the
Something like
numbers
that.
wrong. I could pull up
It's
the
around
chart.
there.
We'll have high tide waters. These will start to have their own effect. It may not really fit into a sea level, what's the level? I don't know. I just see this based on everything I've
They
looked
do.
at.
Yeah, that's why
It's
we're
a much
calling it
more dynamic
resiliency.
situation
because-
than what the floodplain map today indicates.
I think they do fit into sea level rise because, if you have these events far more often, they're there and it's going to affect your development and where you can develop.
Yeah, that's why we did this whole, it's called resiliency. And under the resiliency, there is a component of sea level rise because we recognize sea level rise is a factor. It is not the main factor. And then there are other things like the groundwater coming up, different storm events, all have an impact on how we are a resilient community and continue to address. And that all goes back to our purpose in the entire code. So again, we're thinking of this holistically. Right now, we're focusing on sea level rise. So anything else for this morning? Okay. There's nothing else. And again, any questions, concerns, just keep me up to date. I'm happy to help provide data. If not, everybody have a great rest of your day.
Take care.
Okay.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.